That night was supposed to be simple, just a quiet drive and a polite goodbye. But the moment I stepped inside my boss's house and the door closed behind me, I felt something was wrong. The silence was too heavy, the lights too dim, and her presence too deliberate. And as the minutes passed, I realized I was standing at the edge of a situation that could destroy my career, my reputation, and my sense of right and wrong forever. Because when you are alone with someone powerful and no one else is watching, every word becomes a test, every silence becomes a trap, and one wrong move can change your life in ways you never imagined. So listen carefully to what happened next, because this story is not about temptation alone. It is about fear, control, unspoken intentions, and the moment I understood that leaving might not be as easy as walking out the door. The house felt larger than it should have as every footstep echoed against polished marble floors, while rain pressed softly against the tall glass windows, and the air carried the scent of expensive perfume mixed with old wood. And I stood near the doorway, unsure where to place my hands as my boss's wife sat across the room, silent and still under a single lamp that cast long shadows along the walls, while the clock ticked louder than it should have. Then she looked up slowly with eyes that held something unreadable as the silence stretched heavy on my chest, and I became aware of the faint hum of the air conditioner and the tightness in my throat when she asked my name again, even though she already knew it, and her calm voice carried weight as I answered while forcing steadiness. Then she stood and walked toward the window with heels clicking sharply against the floor, making my pulse quicken as she spoke without turning around and said the house felt empty tonight, and lightning flashed outside, filling the room with white light, where her reflection appeared briefly in the glass, making me feel like I had stepped into a place I did not belong. Then she turned back as the lamp flickered, and her expression changed while the room felt warmer, and she stepped closer until her perfume surrounded me and my hands began to sweat. Then she asked if I felt uncomfortable, and I nodded before stopping myself as she smiled without warmth, while the clock stopped ticking, and I realized it had been unplugged. And the silence returned deeper than before as she reached for something on the table beside me, while my heart pounded in my ears and the rain outside suddenly stopped. Then she looked at me again, closer than ever, as the door behind me made a soft sound while slowly moving, even though I did not touch it and did not look away, as the room felt like it was closing in. And her voice dropped to a whisper, saying, "There were things people never talked about, and that secrets changed everything," as a chill ran through my spine when the lamp went out and darkness swallowed the room, while I stood frozen, feeling her presence inches away as my breath shortened, and the air felt thick, and I sensed movement near my shoulder while the silence pressed harder, and my thoughts raced as I realized I was truly alone with her, and whatever was about to happen had already begun. The darkness felt alive as my eyes struggled to adjust and my breathing grew louder in my ears, while the faint scent of her perfume lingered thicker than before, and the air seemed to press against my skin as if the room itself had decided to lean closer, and I remained frozen because any movement felt dangerous, as though even a small step could shatter something fragile and unseen. Then I sensed her shifting slightly, and the soft sound of fabric brushing against fabric sent a ripple of unease through my body, while my mind raced through thoughts of my boss and the power his name carried and how far away he felt in that moment, and the silence stretched until it felt deliberate, as if it was meant to test how long I could endure it. Then her voice emerged again, low and controlled, telling me to relax, while the words sounded gentle, but carried an edge that made my stomach tighten, and I swallowed hard as my throat felt dry and my tongue heavy, while my hands trembled at my sides, and I became aware of the faint outline of furniture barely visible in the darkness. And somewhere in the distance, a car passed outside, briefly reminding me that the world still existed beyond these walls, yet the house felt sealed off as if it floated alone in the night. And she took another step closer, making me instinctively lean back until I felt the cold surface of the wall against my shoulders, and the chill seeped through my shirt, and my heartbeat grew so loud that I wondered if she could hear it. Then she asked a question slowly about loyalty and trust, and the way people convinced themselves they were doing the right thing even when their actions betrayed them. And I tried to respond, but my voice felt trapped inside my chest, so only a weak sound escaped, while she seemed satisfied with my discomfort and continued speaking as if my silence was permission. And she talked about long evenings in empty rooms and the weight of unspoken thoughts that followed her through the house like shadows. And with each word, the space between us felt smaller, even though I did not feel her touch. And my senses sharpened as I noticed the faint creak of the floor beneath her feet and the subtle shift of air as she moved her arm, and fear mixed with confusion as I struggled to understand her intent while knowing that whatever this moment meant, it could not be undone. And she paused again, letting the quiet sink deep into my mind while my thoughts spiraled and every warning I had ever ignored rose to the surface. Then she mentioned my boss by name, and the sound of it in her mouth sent a jolt through me because it felt deliberate, as if she wanted me to remember exactly who held power over my future. And she asked what I would do if faced with a choice that no one else would ever know about. And sweat formed along my spine as I imagined consequences unfolding like dominoes. And the darkness seemed to thicken as my eyes strained for her silhouette, while my ears caught the faint sound of her breathing close enough to feel. And I realized how vulnerable I was standing there without witnesses, without certainty, without escape. And she spoke again, saying that moments like this revealed who people truly were when the world stopped watching. And my chest tightened as I felt the weight of her gaze, even though I could not see her eyes. And I shifted slightly, causing my shoe to scrape softly against the floor, which made her stop moving entirely. And that sudden stillness terrified me more than motion, because it felt calculated and controlled. And seconds stretched into something unbearable while my mind replayed every decision that had led me here, from accepting the ride to stepping through the front door to standing alone in this room. And I wondered if I should speak or stay silent, as both options felt equally dangerous. And finally she moved again, stepping just close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from her body and the subtle vibration of her voice as she spoke near my ear. And she said that people often mistook silence for safety, when in truth it only amplified what was left unsaid. And a shiver ran through me as her words lingered and the house remained eerily quiet. And somewhere deep inside I sensed that this encounter was testing more than my nerves, because it was probing my limits, my values, and my fear. And I remained pinned against the wall, unable to retreat further, while my thoughts raced and my pulse throbbed and the darkness refused to lift. And as she drew a slow breath and shifted her weight again, I realized that whatever came next would reshape everything I thought I understood about trust, power, and the thin line between choice and consequence, while the room held its breath, waiting for the next move. The darkness seemed to listen, as I stood there pressed against the wall, feeling the slow rhythm of my own breathing clash with the silence of the house, while her presence remained close enough to bend the air between us, and my thoughts drifted in sharp fragments as memories of my ordinary routine felt distant and unreal. And she spoke again with a tone that felt measured and intentional, as if every word had been rehearsed long before this night. And she described how power often revealed itself not through force, but through moments of quiet uncertainty where one person waited for another to act. And I felt my jaw tighten as I struggled to follow her meaning, while sensing that each sentence carried weight beyond its sound. And she stepped away slightly, allowing a thin space between us that somehow felt more dangerous than her closeness, because it invited imagination to fill the gap. And my eyes strained to follow her movement while the darkness refused clarity, and my ears captured the faint brush of her clothing and the subtle creak of the floor as she paced slowly across the room. And she spoke of expectations and how people assumed roles without questioning who wrote the rules. And the words echoed inside my mind as I considered my own position in her house, standing where I did not belong, facing a moment I had not chosen. And a distant rumble of thunder rolled outside, reminding me of the storm that had passed and the calm that followed, which felt unnatural and tense. And she stopped pacing and faced me again as I sensed her attention sharpen, and I felt exposed despite the lack of light. And she asked if I believed people could sense danger before it arrived, or if fear only surfaced after something irreversible occurred. And my mouth opened, but no sound came as my thoughts tangled and my pulse beat hard against my ribs. And she seemed to accept my silence as an answer, as she continued speaking about choices that appeared small but carried consequences that stretched far beyond a single night. And I became acutely aware of the weight of the house itself, with its tall ceilings and quiet corners and hidden rooms that seemed to hold memories and secrets absorbed into the walls. And I wondered how many conversations like this had taken place here, and how many had ended without witnesses. And she moved toward the window again, and for a moment the faint glow of streetlight filtered through the glass, outlining her shape just enough to remind me she was real and close and in control. And she rested her hand against the glass and spoke of loneliness in a way that felt practiced yet sincere, describing days filled with people and nights filled with absence. And I listened despite myself feeling a strange pull between empathy and alarm, as my instincts urged caution while my mind tried to make sense of her vulnerability. and she turned her head slightly and asked if I had ever felt invisible in a room full of people, and the question struck deeper than expected as memories surfaced of long hours at work, unnoticed efforts overlooked, and moments where silence felt safer than truth. And my hesitation lingered as I nodded slowly, and she seemed to sense the movement even in the darkness. And she stepped closer again, and her voice softened as she spoke of recognition and the human desire to be seen and understood. And the words resonated uncomfortably as I questioned her purpose, and whether this conversation was genuine or calculated. And the air felt warmer again, as if the house responded to the tension, and my palms grew damp as I shifted my weight uncertainly. And she paused, allowing the silence to stretch once more while my thoughts raced, and I searched for a way to regain control of the situation without provoking a reaction. And she resumed speaking with a subtle change in tone, one that suggested curiosity rather than confession, as she asked what I thought my boss expected from me beyond my job description. And the mention of him sent another jolt through, as I pictured his face and authority and the trust he placed in me, and I felt a wave of discomfort at the thought of betraying that trust even through conversation. And she seemed to read my hesitation as she remarked that loyalty often came with unspoken tests, and that people rarely realized they were being tested until afterward. And my heart sank as the implications settled in, and I wondered if this moment itself was such a test designed to reveal something about me. And she moved again, circling slowly while maintaining a careful distance, and I turned slightly to track her position, feeling like prey following the movement of something unseen, and the faint sound of her breath remained steady and controlled, contrasting sharply with my own uneven rhythm. And she spoke about reputation, and how quickly stories formed and spread even without evidence, and how fragile standing could become once doubt entered the picture. And the thought made my chest tighten as I imagined scenarios unfolding beyond my control, and the fear of misinterpretation loomed large. And she stopped directly in front of me again, and the proximity made my senses sharpen as I noticed the subtle warmth of her body and the quiet confidence in her stance. And she asked if I trusted myself to do the right thing when no one else was present. And the question echoed loudly in my mind as I considered the complexity of right and wrong in a situation defined by imbalance and ambiguity, and I struggled to answer, knowing that any response could be used to shape her perception of me. And she waited patiently, allowing the moment to stretch until my silence became its own statement. And she nodded slightly as if acknowledging something she had already decided, and she spoke again, saying that fear often masked clarity, and that clarity arrived only after facing discomfort directly. And she reached out, not to touch me, but to gesture toward the door behind me, and the motion drew my attention to it, as if reminding me that an exit existed even if it felt distant. And she commented on how people often forgot they had the option to leave when pressure built slowly rather than all at once. And the observation struck me as both insightful and unsettling, as I realized how easily I had allowed the situation to progress without asserting myself. And I considered stepping away, yet hesitated, unsure whether movement would escalate tension or ease it. And she seemed to sense my indecision, as she stepped back again, granting space that felt almost generous. And she spoke calmly about boundaries, and how they define not just relationships, but self-respect. And the irony of her words was not lost on me as I questioned her intent, and whether she sought to test or teach or manipulate. And the darkness remained unbroken as my eyes continued to strain, and my thoughts drifted between past and future, imagining how this night might be remembered and what narrative might follow. And she mentioned how moments like these lingered in memory, not because of what happened, but because of what almost happened, and the paths left unexplored. And the idea unsettled me as I felt caught between relief and dread at the notion of unresolved tension. And she turned away once more and walked toward the lamp that had gone dark earlier, and I heard the soft click of a switch as a faint glow returned, not fully illuminating the room, but enough to cast long shadows and reveal fragments of her expression, which appeared composed and thoughtful. And the partial light made the room feel smaller and more intimate, and my unease deepened as the scene shifted subtly yet significantly. And she looked at me with an intensity that suggested appraisal rather than desire, and she remarked that reactions revealed more than words ever could, and I felt exposed as if my fear and confusion had been catalogued and assessed. And she moved the lamp, slightly adjusting its angle, and the shifting light created distorted shapes along the walls that seemed to move with us, adding to the surreal atmosphere. And she spoke of control again, emphasizing that true control often lay in restraint and the choice not to act. and the statement resonated as I considered the restraint required to maintain my composure and values in this moment. And she asked if I understood, and I nodded, slowly feeling the weight of the exchange settle in my chest. And she seemed satisfied with the response as she stepped away and rested against a nearby table, maintaining eye contact as the silence returned less oppressive, but still charged. And my breathing gradually steadied, though my heart continued to race, and I felt a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety as the immediate tension eased without resolution, and she observed quietly as if allowing me time to process. And I wondered whether this pause signaled the end of one test or the beginning of another, and the house remained still around us as if holding its breath, and I sensed that whatever line had been approached had not yet been crossed, but its presence lingered, unmistakably. And she spoke again, softly remarking that nights like this often revealed truths people avoided in daylight, and that awareness once gained could not be undone. And I listened, knowing that the experience had already altered my perspective, and that the memory would follow me long after I left this house. And as the lamp continued to cast its dim glow and the storm outside remained silent, I stood there, aware that the moment was not finished and that something still hovered just beyond clarity, waiting to unfold.